On New Year's Eve, the most feared man in the city stood alone in the snow, rejected by 6 restaurants in a row. Not because he lacked money, not because he lacked power, but because for the first time in 17 years, the world simply did not make room for him. An hour later, a struggling single mother would invite him to share her table in a forgotten diner. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his reputation. She didn't know that this man had ordered disappearances with a single phone call. What she couldn't know was that one small act of kindness would become the most dangerous mistake of her life and the beginning of the end for his empire. Because when a man who controls everything finally feels human, he becomes vulnerable. And in his world, vulnerability is a death sentence. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse at exactly 11:12 p.m. Marco Duca didn't flinch. He merely adjusted his cufflinks while the man on the floor stopped moving. 17 years at the top had taught him many things, chief among them, that hesitation was a luxury reserved for people who could afford to be weak. 48 minutes later, he stood outside the most expensive restaurant in the city, snow melting silently into the shoulders of his $1,000 coat, listening to a hostess apologize for the 6th time that night. "I'm very sorry, sir. We're completely booked." She didn't recognize him. That was the problem. Or maybe that was the point. Marco Duca had never been told no. Not like this. Not politely. Not without fear flickering behind someone's eyes. In his world, doors opened before he reached them. Tables appeared. Chefs stepped out of kitchens. Managers bent reality to accommodate him. Power meant certainty. Power meant never standing outside in the cold, waiting. Yet there he was, New Year's Eve, alone. He nodded once, turned away before she could offer another hollow apology, and waved off the driver waiting by the black Mercedes. The engine idled obediently, but Marco didn't get in. He walked instead, footsteps crunching against the snow, moving without direction for the first time in years. The city glittered around him, couples laughing, strangers kissing too early, champagne spilling onto sidewalks. Fireworks cracked in the distance, illegal but enthusiastic. Everyone seemed to be rushing toward something. Everyone except him. When was the last time he'd felt hunger? Real hunger. Not the scheduled meals prepared by someone else, eaten between calls and threats and deals. His stomach tightened, unfamiliar and insistent. That was when he saw it. A diner wedged between a shuttered shoe repair shop and a laundromat. The neon sign flickered, one letter barely hanging on, as if even the name itself was tired of existing. Through the fogged-up window, the place looked almost empty. Perfect. He pushed the door open. A bell chimed, sharp and honest. Warmth hit him immediately, along with the smell of coffee and something fried. An older woman behind the counter glanced up from a crossword puzzle, eyes assessing but uninterested. "Kitchen's about to close," she said. "If you're eating, sit." Marco sat. He chose a small table near the back, habit guiding him to keep his spine to the wall. Old instincts didn't die easily. He removed his coat, folded it carefully, and placed it beside him, around him. Life continued quietly, an old man nursing coffee, 2 teenagers sharing a milkshake, their knees touching like it was the most important thing in the world. And then he saw them. A woman and a little girl sat in the far booth, half hidden by a support beam. The woman's coat was thin, patched at one elbow. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, dark strands escaping no matter how carefully she'd tied it. The child couldn't have been more than 7, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit with one ear permanently bent. Their table was full, grilled cheese crumbs, a bowl scraped clean, nothing wasted. Marco's burger arrived. He barely noticed. "Excuse me." He looked up. The woman was standing beside his table now, one hand resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder. Up close, she was younger than he'd expected, early 30s. Maybe. Her eyes held something he couldn't name. Not fear, not curiosity, just kindness. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said gently, "but I noticed you're eating alone." Marco blinked. In his world, people didn't approach him. They waited. They calculated. They feared. She gestured toward the back. "We have more room at our table, if you'd like to join us for the countdown." Eating alone on New Year's Eve feels a little sad. The word hit harder than any threat ever had. Sad? "I don't want to intrude," Marco heard himself say. "You wouldn't?" she replied, smiling, the kind that reached her eyes. "I'm Anna. This is Sophie." The girl waved shyly. Marco stood. "Marco?" He followed them to the booth. The seat creaked beneath his weight, cheap vinyl protesting quietly. He didn't mind. Sophie scooted closer to her mother, careful to keep her rabbit safe. They talked, not about important things, not about money or power or danger. Anna worked 2 jobs. Sophie loved drawing and hated math. The diner was their tradition once a month, sometimes less. Marco listened, truly listened, and said almost nothing about himself. When he offered his fries, Sophie looked to her mother first. Anna hesitated, pride flickering, then nodded. Marco understood the choreography instantly. Charity disguised as waste, dignity preserved. He respected that more than most business negotiations he'd ever conducted. The television behind the counter flickered to life. Times Square filled the screen. The countdown began. Sophie squeezed her mother's hand. Anna closed her eyes, lips moving silently. Marco watched them, something tight and unfamiliar pressing against his chest. When had he last wished for anything? 10, 9, 8? Anna opened her eyes and caught Marco looking at them. She didn't look away. Neither did he. 3, 2, 1. The diner erupted softly. Fireworks exploded outside. The teenagers kissed. The old man raised his coffee cup to no one in particular. "Happy New Year," Anna said. "Happy New Year," Marco replied. And in that moment, the most dangerous man in the city realized something terrifying. No one in this room knew who he was. No one feared him. No one owed him anything. And for the first time in 17 years, he didn't want them to. When Anna and Sophie bundled into their coats and said goodbye, Marco stood to watch them leave. The bell chimed again. The door closed. The warmth lingered. Outside, the snow kept falling. Marco remained seated long after his burger went cold, staring at a table that had, for one brief hour, made him feel human. He didn't know it yet, but that feeling, the warmth, the simplicity, the dangerous hope would cost him everything. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Marco did not follow them out of the diner immediately. He waited until the bell stopped ringing, until the warmth settled back into its ordinary stillness, until Rosa began wiping the counter as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Only then did he rise, leave a bill folded beneath his glass, and step back into the cold. The street had grown louder, voices spilling from bars, fireworks cracking too close to windows, laughter teetering on the edge of chaos. He spotted Anna and Sophie half a block ahead, their shadows stretching thin beneath the streetlights. He told himself he was simply walking in the same direction. He told himself many things. He kept his distance anyway, far enough to be invisible, close enough to see Sophie stumble and be steadied by her mother's hand. It was dangerous out tonight. Anyone could see that. And yet, as Marco matched their pace, he knew this had nothing to do with caution, and everything to do with a strange responsibility he had not agreed to but could not refuse. They reached a narrow apartment building with peeling paint and a broken intercom that hung uselessly from the wall. The front door didn't close all the way. It caught, hesitated, then gave in with a tired sigh. Marco noticed. He noticed everything. Anna ushered Sophie inside, brushing snow from her hair, murmuring something that made the girl laugh softly. The door shut behind them. The light in the stairwell flickered once, then steadied. Marco stood across the street, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the building as if it had just marked him in some irreversible way. Only when he was certain they were inside did he turn away. His penthouse greeted him with silence so complete it rang. Marble floors, glass walls. The city spread below like a private possession. He poured himself a drink and didn't touch it. He stood at the window, imagining a cramped apartment 4 blocks away where a mother tucked her child into bed, where heat might fail and money might not stretch, but where laughter had existed that night. Simple things, normal things, things Marco had trained himself never to want. His phone vibrated. Vincent, again. The business of the night demanded attention, a shipment delayed, a disagreement escalating. Marco answered, issued orders with practiced ease, his voice steady, controlled, dangerous. Yet even as he spoke the language he knew best, his mind kept slipping back to a vinyl booth and a bent-eared rabbit. When the call ended, dawn was already thinning the dark. Anna woke to the sound of pipes knocking somewhere in the walls. The apartment was colder than she'd hoped, her breath faintly visible as she pulled the quilt higher around Sophie. She moved carefully, making tea with a reused bag, counting steps, counting coins, counting time. The night felt distant now, like a bright dream that didn't quite fit the shape of her life. And yet she found herself thinking of Marco, the way he had pushed the fries towards Sophie without making it feel like pity, the way his eyes had softened when her daughter laughed. She told herself it had been nothing. People crossed paths and parted every day. Some moments were simply meant to be small. Across the city, Marco did something he hadn't done in years. He drove himself. He ignored the usual routes, the polished entrances, the places where his name carried weight. His car turned down 7th Street without conscious permission, slowing as it passed the diner, now dark and closed. He continued on, past the grocery store with faded signs, past the bus stop where a woman waited with shoulders hunched against the cold. He told himself he was surveying territory. He told himself he was curious. The truth settled quietly in his chest. He was looking for something that had nothing to do with power. It happened 2 days later. Anna stepped out of the grocery store, bags heavy with store-brand cans and discounted bread. The wind cut through her coat, sharp and impatient. She stopped at the corner to count what was left in her purse, shoulders slumping for just a second before she straightened and moved on. A black car idled nearby, too sleek for the street, unnoticed by everyone except the man watching from behind the wheel. Marco saw the calculation in her hands, the careful balance of need and dignity. Before he could think better of it, he was out of the car. Anna. She turned, surprise giving way to recognition, and then, unexpectedly, a smile. Marco. The New Year's guy. There was no suspicion in her voice, only warmth, and it unsettled him more than hostility ever could. He offered to help carry a bag. She hesitated, then relented, explaining about sore shoulders as if she needed an excuse. They walked together. He noticed the weight of the groceries, the dents in the cans, the way she talked about Sophie as if the world revolved on that small axis. She asked where he lived. He answered vaguely. She accepted it without pressing. They reached her building. The broken intercom stared at him like an accusation. "This is me," Anna said, her tone shifting just enough for him to hear the edge. He realized he had looked too long, let something slip through his carefully controlled expression. "It's home," she added, more firmly this time. Marco handed over the bag, nodding once. Mama Sophie burst through the door, backpack bouncing, joy immediate and unguarded. She froze when she saw him, then grinned. "It's the New Year's man." Marco crouched instinctively, meeting her at eye level, returning her wave with a seriousness that made Anna watch him differently. An older neighbor followed Sophie out, eyes sharp, assessing. Marco felt the weight of those eyes and, for the first time in his life, did not resent it. He left soon after, promising nothing. As he walked back to his car, a sensation crept up his spine. Not fear, not exactly, but awareness. From across the street, another pair of eyes tracked his movement, cold and interested. Marco felt it then, unmistakable. In his world, attention was never accidental, and now, without meaning to, he had given his enemies something priceless. Anna closed the door behind her, unaware of the gaze that lingered outside, unaware that the brief warmth of a shared table had begun to stretch into something far more dangerous. Marco drove away, jaw tight, already calculating consequences. He had crossed an invisible line the moment he stepped toward her. The city did not forgive men who blurred boundaries, and for the first time in 17 years, Marco Duca wondered whether the cost would be more than he was willing to pay. Marco noticed the watcher before the watcher knew he'd been seen. It was instinct, sharpened by years of survival, an awareness that slid beneath the skin and refused to be ignored. He drove away calmly, not altering his speed, not checking the mirrors too often. Panic was an admission. Still, when he reached the next intersection, he took a turn he hadn't planned. The car behind him followed. That confirmed it. By the time he reached the main avenue, Marco had already decided 2 things: the tale was deliberate, and it had nothing to do with business. Not yet. He didn't lose them. He didn't need to. Instead, he let the car drift close enough to read its intent, then disappear into traffic as if swallowed by the city itself. Back at his penthouse, Marco stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, giving short, precise instructions. Nothing loud. Nothing that could be traced back to Anna. He was careful with her name, careful even with his thoughts. Attention was a currency he could afford anywhere else but not here. Across the city, Anna felt the day closing in on her the way it always did. Sophie sprawled on the floor with crayons and paper, humming as she drew stars and fireworks, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Anna sat at the small table, shoulders tense, eyes flicking between numbers and the clock. Extra work from the call center lay stacked beside her. Holiday pay? Necessary pay? The radiator clanked and went quiet again, producing no warmth. She pulled her cardigan tighter and told herself she was fine. She always was. She thought of Marco despite herself. The way he had carried the grocery bag as if it were nothing. The way he had crouched to Sophie's height without being asked. Men like him well-dressed, distant, didn't usually notice the details that mattered. She scolded herself for the thought. He was a stranger, a coincidence. One night, one shared table. That was all. That evening, Anna stepped outside to take the trash down. The hallway light flickered. She paused, listening. The building settled around her, old and imperfect but familiar. As she reached the curb, a car rolled past slowly, windows dark. She felt a prickle at the back of her neck. When she turned, the street was empty again. She shook it off. The city made everyone jumpy. Marco did not shake it off. The next morning, his men confirmed what he already suspected. The Watcher belonged to a smaller crew testing the edges of his territory, sniffing for weakness. They hadn't acted yet. They were observing, waiting. And Marco knew exactly what they'd seen: a man stepping out of line, crossing a boundary he'd drawn himself. He closed his eyes briefly, imagining Anna's apartment, the broken intercom, the door that didn't close properly. Rage flared, sharp and protective. He crushed it down. Rage was sloppy. He drove past the building again, farther this time, eyes on the reflections rather than the windows. Two men loitered near the corner, pretending to smoke, pretending not to look. Marco recognized the posture. He didn't confront them. He parked 3 blocks away and waited until they drifted off, bored. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. Anna felt the shift before she understood it, a wrongness in the air. She hurried Sophie along after school, fingers tight around her daughter's hand. Sophie chattered about a drawing she wanted to finish, about the man from New Year's Eve, about how tall he'd looked in her picture. Anna smiled automatically, but her attention kept snagging on movement at the edges of her vision. When they reached the building, she tested the door twice, then a third time. It still didn't lock properly. She made a mental note to wedge a chair beneath the handle that night. Later, as Sophie slept, Anna stood by the window, watching the street below. She told herself she was being foolish. Nothing had happened. Yet unease settled into her bones, heavy and insistent. She reached for her phone, thumb hovering over a contact she hadn't saved. Marco hadn't given her his number. She hadn't asked. The distance between them was supposed to be safe. It was Marco who crossed it first. He knocked once, softly. When Anna opened the door, surprise flashed across her face, followed by hesitation. He didn't step inside. He didn't smile. He simply said, "Your lock needs fixing." She frowned. "How do you? I noticed," he replied. Truth, stripped of explanation. He met her gaze steadily, willing her to see the concern rather than the intrusion. "It's not safe." Silence stretched. Then Anna nodded, stepping aside. 5 minutes, she said. "My daughter's asleep. Marco worked quickly, movements efficient, controlled. He carried tools he hadn't meant to use tonight, a quiet admission that he'd been planning this visit even as he'd denied it. When he finished, the door clicked shut with a satisfying finality. Anna tested it, surprised despite herself. "Thank you," she said, softer now. "Be careful," Marco replied. He paused at the threshold, words pressing against his restraint. "If anything feels wrong, anything you tell me." Her eyes sharpened. "Why?" "Because you matter," he thought. "Because I let the city see you." Instead, he said, Because I'd like to know. He left before she could ask more. From the shadows across the street, someone watched him go, interest hardening into intent. That night, Anna lay awake listening to the new silence of a secure door, her heart racing without a clear reason. Somewhere else in the city, Marco stood by his window again, calculating moves he'd sworn he'd never make for anyone. The city had noticed. The line had been crossed, and neither of them yet understood how quickly kindness could become a target. The building felt different after Marco fixed the lock. The change was subtle, almost imaginary. Yet Anna noticed it the next morning when she tested the door out of habit and felt it hold firm beneath her hand. Security, she realized, was not only about steel and screws, it was about being seen. And somehow, without asking for it, she had been seen. The thought unsettled her more than the cold creeping along the floor. She pushed it aside, waking Sophie, packing lunches, returning to the quiet choreography of survival. Life did not pause for questions that had no clear answers. Marco, meanwhile, did not sleep. He sat at his desk, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, staring at a map of the city marked with lines only he could read. His men reported movement, nothing overt, nothing actionable. Curiosity, not aggression. Yet curiosity was often the first step toward blood. He tightened his jaw, forcing himself to think strategically rather than emotionally. He had not promised Anna protection. He had simply fixed a lock. A single gesture did not rewrite the rules of his world, and yet he knew better than to believe that. 2 days passed without incident. Anna's routine remained intact. Sophie walked to school with a neighbor. The grocery store clerk smiled. The diner reopened, its neon sign buzzing stubbornly against the gray sky. Normality returned, fragile but convincing. Anna allowed herself to breathe again. She even laughed once, catching herself mid-sound, startled by how long it had been since laughter came easily. Marco saw her there. By chance or fate, he stopped questioning which. She sat by the window with a cup of coffee she was clearly nursing. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time since he'd met her. He watched from across the street, telling himself he would keep moving. Instead, he crossed over, drawn by a gravity that ignored reason. "Good morning," he said softly. Anna looked up, surprise blooming into something warmer. "Marco, you always appear when I least expect you." He took the seat across from her. Careful, deliberate. "That wasn't my intention." She studied him, searching for the edges he kept hidden. "The lock works," she said finally. Sophie slept through the night. So did I. Something eased in his chest. "I'm glad." They talked not about danger, not about locks or watchers, but about small things. The weather, Sophie's drawings, a recipe Anna wanted to try if groceries stretched far enough. Marco listened, responding without rehearsed lines, without masks. He told her about growing up with rules that never bent, about a childhood measured in expectations rather than affection. He did not tell her the names attached to those memories. He didn't need to. Anna sensed the omission but didn't press. She was learning that some silences carried their own truths. When Sophie burst through the diner door after school, backpack slipping from one shoulder, the moment shifted. The child ran straight to Marco, throwing her arms around him with unguarded joy. He froze, then slowly returned the hug, his hand hovering before settling lightly between her shoulders. Anna watched, something tightening painfully in her chest. She had not invited this closeness. She had not prevented it either. They walked home together, an accidental trio. People glanced at them, seeing nothing remarkable, just a man, a woman, a child. Marco noticed every look, every pause. He cataloged them all. When they reached the building, Anna hesitated, fingers brushing the doorframe. "You don't have to keep coming by," she said gently, not accusing, simply stating a boundary she was still learning how to draw. Marco met her gaze. "I know." The truth lingered between them, unspoken. He left without argument. From the end of the block, a man with a cigarette watched the scene, eyes narrowing as Marco walked away. The interest had shifted. This was no longer casual observation. That night, Marco's phone rang just after midnight. Vincent's voice was controlled, too controlled. "We have a situation," he said. "Someone's asking questions. About you." Marco closed his eyes. "Let them ask. They're not asking about business." A pause. "They're asking about a woman." Silence followed, heavy and dangerous. Marco's hand tightened around the phone. "Who doesn't matter yet," Vincent replied. "But it will." When the call ended, Marco stood in the dark, the city stretching beneath him like a living thing. He understood the cost of attention. He had paid it many times before. This time, the bill was not his alone. Anna sensed it too, though she had no name for it. She double-checked the windows before bed. She kept the lights on a little longer. Sophie slept peacefully, unaware of the shifting ground beneath her dreams. Anna sat beside her, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. Outside, the city moved quietly, conspiratorially. Lines were being redrawn, choices were narrowing. Marco had wanted nothing more than to fix a lock, to ensure a door stayed closed against the cold. Instead, he had opened something far more dangerous, an attachment the city would not ignore. And somewhere between the flicker of diner lights and the silence of a secure door, both of them felt it the moment when protection stops being an act and becomes a promise, whether spoken or not. Anna learned the truth by accident, the way most dangerous knowledge enters a person's life quietly, without warning, disguised as something ordinary. She was entering an extra shift at the call center, headset pressed too tightly against her ear, eyes blurring as names and numbers scrolled past. During a brief break, 2 coworkers nearby spoke in lowered voices, unaware of her presence behind the partition. A name drifted through the air, spoken with curiosity, sharpened by fear. Marco Duca. The tone was wrong for a stranger, heavy with implication. Anna felt a chill crawl up her spine before she fully understood why. She went home with the name echoing in her head, repeating it until it lost shape, then regained it with sharper edges. That night, after Sophie fell asleep clutching her rabbit, Anna searched. Slowly, carefully. The screen filled with fragments, rumors framed as facts, facts framed as rumors, photographs blurred just enough to deny certainty. A powerful figure, untouchable, dangerous. She recognized his eyes instantly. The calm, the control, the man who had carried her groceries as if they mattered. Anna closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the building breathe around her. Her first instinct was denial. The second was anger at him, at herself, at the part of her that had allowed safety to feel like affection. By morning, anger hardened into resolve. She would end this before it reached Sophie. She had survived worse than disappointment. She would survive this too. Marco sensed the shift before Anna spoke a word. He noticed it in the way she avoided the diner, in the way Sophie's neighbor walked her home instead. Distance had a shape, he knew it well. When he finally saw Anna again, she didn't smile. She stood straighter, eyes guarded, voice steady as glass. "I know who you are," she said without preamble. The street seemed to pause around them. Marco did not ask how. He did not deny it. He met her gaze, accepting the verdict in her eyes. "Then you know why this is dangerous," he replied quietly. Anna nodded once. "For my daughter. For you," Marco said. She shook her head. "For Sophie. That's all that matters." He wanted to argue. He wanted to explain the layers, the distance between himself and the violence people associated with his name. But explanations were luxuries for people who hadn't built their lives on caution. Anna didn't need reassurance. She needed an ending. "This can't continue," she said. "Whatever this is." Marco felt the words like a cut, precise and deliberate. "I understand," he replied, and meant it. She turned away without waiting for more. Sophie watched from the doorway, confusion knitting her brows. Marco waved once, a promise he didn't know how to keep, then walked away. He did not look back. That was how he survived. The city did not respect endings. 2 nights later, Anna noticed the car. It idled too long, returned too often, its presence subtle enough to be denied, but persistent enough to be felt. She changed routes, altered schedules, taught Sophie new games that kept her close. Fear settled in her bones, old and familiar. She told herself Marco was gone. She told herself she was imagining things. Marco, meanwhile, was dealing with consequences he could no longer contain. The questions Vincent had warned him about had sharpened into interest. Someone had confirmed what they suspected Marco Duca had a weakness. Worse, it wasn't a secret anymore. Marco issued orders, quiet ones, defensive ones, but he knew the truth. Once attention fixed itself on something vulnerable, it did not release it easily. The warning came too late. Anna was locking the door one evening when a shadow detached itself from the stairwell. A voice spoke her name with practiced calm. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she stepped back, Sophie's small hand tightening in hers. The man smiled without warmth, eyes flicking to the child. "Mr. Duca sends his regards," he said. Marco arrived minutes later, the sound of his car cutting through the street like a blade. He took in the scene instantly, the fear in Anna's eyes. The man's casual posture, the threat implied rather than spoken. Violence followed with brutal efficiency. It was over before Anna could fully process it, before Sophie could scream. Marco stood between them and the fallen man, breath steady, expression unreadable. "Get inside," he said to Anna, voice controlled but urgent. She didn't move. She stared at him, seeing the truth not as words on a screen, but as blood on concrete, as the terrifying ease with which he reclaimed control. Sophie buried her face against Anna's side, shaking. "This is why," Anna said hoarsely. "This is why I can't." Marco turned to face her, every instinct urging him to pull them close, to promise safety he could not guarantee. Instead, he stepped back. "You're right," he said. "I shouldn't have come near you." "Then don't," she whispered. He nodded once, then disappeared into the night, leaving silence in his wake. Anna locked the door and slid down against it, holding Sophie as if her arms alone could keep the world out. She knew now that distance would not save them. The truth had teeth. It had drawn blood. And somewhere beyond the thin walls of her apartment, a man who had once shared fries at a diner was preparing for a war he had never intended to fight for the sake of a woman who had already walked away. Anna did not sleep that night. She sat on the floor beside Sophie's bed, back against the wall, listening to every sound the building made as if it were a warning spoken too softly. The image of the man in the stairwell replayed itself with merciless clarity, the way his smile hadn't reached his eyes. The way he had looked at Sophie not as a child, but as leverage. Marco's arrival followed in her memory, swift and terrifying. Violence unfolding with a precision that left no room for doubt. This was his world. She had brushed against it, and now it had reached back. By morning, the city looked unchanged. Cars moved, people hurried, snow melted into gray slush. Normality was the cruelest disguise of all. Anna packed a bag without fully deciding where she would go. She folded Sophie's clothes carefully, choosing the warmest ones, slipping the stuffed rabbit into the side pocket. Sophie watched quietly, eyes too serious for her age. "Are we going on a trip?" she asked. "Just for a little while," Anna replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. "An adventure." Sophie nodded, trusting. That trust nearly broke Anna's resolve. Marco spent the night dismantling a threat he could no longer pretend was distant. Orders moved through the city like ripples, invisible but effective. He eliminated questions before they became plans, redirected attention with calculated misdirection. Yet for every move he made, another consequence rose to meet it. His name carried weight, it always had. Now it carried a vulnerability that could not be erased with fear alone. He stood at the window as dawn crept in, phone pressed to his ear, listening to confirmation that the man from the stairwell had not acted alone. This was not a test anymore. It was escalation. Marco closed his eyes briefly. Acknowledging the truth he had avoided distance would not protect Anna and Sophie. Silence would not either. The city had already noticed them. He arrived at the apartment before Anna finished packing. She opened the door with fury and relief tangled together, both sharp. "I told you to stay away," she said. "I know," Marco replied. "That's why I'm here." She laughed once, brittle. "That makes no sense." "It does," he said quietly. "They won't stop because you asked me to disappear. They'll stop when they can't reach you." Anna's instinct was to refuse, to cling to autonomy like a shield. But Sophie stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Marco's leg with the same unthinking trust she always had. The sight cut deeper than any threat. "We're not going anywhere with you," Anna said, though the words felt thinner than she wanted. "Not with me," Marco corrected. "Away from me." He laid out the plan with careful restraint. A temporary place. Quiet. Unremarkable. No names attached. He would not be there. He would not call. He would not cross paths with them. Protection without presence. It was the only version of care he could offer without condemning them. Anna looked at Sophie, then back at Marco. She searched his face for deception and found none. Only resolve. And beneath it, something that frightened her more than lies restraint. "Promise me," she said finally, voice low. "Promise you won't come near us again." Marco held her gaze. "I promise," he said, knowing the cost of every syllable. They left before nightfall. Marco watched from a distance, unseen, as Anna guided Sophie into a car that would take them out of the neighborhood. Out of reach, he hoped. The door closed. The engine started. The car disappeared into traffic. Marco did not follow. He stood there long after the street returned to ordinary motion, feeling the city shift around the absence he had created. The safe place was modest and anonymous, a quiet apartment with functioning locks and neighbors who minded their own business. Anna unpacked slowly, grounding herself in routine. Sophie explored, delighted by the novelty, by the echo of her footsteps. For a moment, Anna allowed herself to believe they had outrun the danger. That belief shattered 2 days later. A note appeared beneath the door. No threat, no signature, just a message written with deliberate calm. "Distance doesn't change what belongs to him." Anna's hands trembled as she folded the paper. Marco's promise echoed in her mind, heavy and useless. She understood then what he had known all along. Protection had never been about proximity. It was about power. And power had a reach she could not escape. Marco received word within the hour. He stood in a warehouse lit by a single hanging bulb, the air thick with tension. His men waited for instruction. For the first time in years. Marco hesitated not from fear, but from clarity. Every move he made tightened the net around Anna. Every restraint invited others to test it. He made his choice without announcing it. Orders went out, not to strike, but to withdraw, to pull back from alliances that fed on spectacle, to erase his name from conversations where it could be weaponized. It was a dangerous strategy, one that would be read as weakness. Marco accepted that risk without flinching. That night, Anna sat beside Sophie as she slept, the note crushed in her palm. She realized the truth with painful clarity. Marco had not brought danger into her life. He had revealed it. And in doing so, he had already begun to lose the very power that defined him. Somewhere in the city, Marco stood alone again. The distance between two worlds stretched thin and trembling. Protection had failed. Promises had fractured. And yet, as the city watched for signs of weakness, Marco Duca prepared to do something far more dangerous than violence. He prepared to let go. The city sensed it before anyone spoke the words. Power always left a vacuum when it shifted. And Marco's absence from the places that mattered did not go unnoticed. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unanswered. Rumors threaded themselves through alleys and boardrooms alike, gaining shape with every retelling. A man like Marco Duca did not retreat unless something had broken him, or unless he was planning something far more dangerous than violence. Anna felt the consequences first. The silence after the note beneath the door was worse than any threat. It meant someone was watching without urgency, confident enough to wait. She changed routines again, kept Sophie indoors, spoke softly even when alone. The apartment felt too small for fear and love at the same time. She told herself Marco had kept his promise. She also knew promises meant little against a city that fed on leverage. Marco returned only when restraint proved useless. He did not call ahead. He did not knock. He appeared in the doorway as if summoned by the weight of the moment itself. Anna stiffened, anger flaring hot and immediate. "You promised," she said, voice low so Sophie wouldn't hear. "I did," Marco replied, closing the door behind him. "And I broke it." The honesty stunned her into silence. He didn't approach. He didn't look at Sophie's room. He stood still, as if any movement might push things past a point he could no longer control. "They're not after proximity," he continued. "They're after certainty. As long as my name means power, you will never be out of reach." Anna crossed her arms, bracing herself. "So what are you here to do?" "To end it," Marco said. She searched his face for bravado, for manipulation, for the practiced confidence of a man used to winning. She found none, only resolve sharpened by loss. "I'm stepping down," he went on, words measured, irreversible. "I'm dismantling everything that ties my name to fear. I'm giving it away before someone takes it from you." The room felt suddenly too quiet. Anna laughed, short and incredulous. "You think walking away fixes this, no?" Marco replied. "I think staying guarantees it never ends." Sophie appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shift in voices. She looked between them, confusion softening into worry. Marco knelt, careful, deliberate. "I'm going to be gone for a while," he said gently. "But you'll be safe." "Are you leaving because of me?" Sophie asked, small hands tightening around her rabbit. Marco hesitated, then chose truth. "I'm leaving because you matter." Something in Anna cracked then. The anger drained, leaving fear and something dangerously close to grief. "You don't get to decide this alone," she said. "I know," Marco replied. "That's why I'm telling you before it happens." The dismantling began that night. Marco ceded territory, redistributed resources, cut alliances that thrived on spectacle. Each decision cost him credibility, loyalty, bloodless victories he had once collected without thought. Rivals circled, mistaking restraint for weakness. Marco let them. Weakness, he had learned, was relative. Anna watched from a distance she had not chosen. News traveled even to places she tried to keep untouched. Names disappeared. Deals collapsed. The city shifted on its axis. Fear gave way to uncertainty, and uncertainty was far more dangerous. Sophie sensed it too, clinging closer, asking fewer questions. Anna held her and waited for the inevitable price. It came as a knock at dawn, not violent, not rushed, a message delivered by absence. Marco was gone, no explanation, no assurance, just the echo of his last words and a city that felt suddenly unmoored. Anna's fear sharpened into clarity. She understood now what Marco had given up, not just power, but identity. He had erased himself to draw attention away from them. Days passed. Then weeks. The watchers thinned. The air grew lighter. Sophie laughed again. Anna allowed herself to breathe, even to hope. And then the news broke quietly. Buried beneath larger scandals, Marco Duca had vanished. Some said he'd been killed. Others claimed exile. The truth mattered less than the effect. His name no longer anchored fear. Anna found him by accident, the way truths tended to surface when one stopped chasing them. A small cafe far from the city's center. A man with familiar eyes reading a paper as if the world might still surprise him. He looked up and saw her, and for a moment, the distance between them collapsed. "You shouldn't be here," Marco said softly. "I know," Anna replied. "But I needed to see if you were real." He smiled, faint and unguarded. "I'm less than I was." She sat across from him anyway. "You're more," she said, surprising herself with the certainty. They didn't touch. They didn't promise. They spoke of Sophie, of quiet days, of the fragile peace that followed storms. Outside, the city moved on, already forgetting the man who had once ruled it. As Anna left, she understood the truth of Marco's choice. Power had never been the hardest thing to wield. Letting it go, choosing love over dominion, safety over control, that was the act that destroyed a king and revealed a man. The city did not mourn Marco Duca. It adjusted. Power never vanished. It redistributed itself, flowing into hungrier hands, reshaping alliances with quiet efficiency. The absence he left behind created a silence that some mistook for peace and others for opportunity. Marco understood both interpretations intimately. He lived now on the margins of that silence, in a life stripped of ceremony and guarded anonymity, where no one bowed and no one feared him. The loss was not sudden. It arrived in small cuts, fewer doors opening, fewer names answering his calls, a narrowing circle of relevance. He accepted it without complaint, Acceptance, he learned, was a discipline. Anna felt the aftershocks differently. The watchers were gone, or perhaps they had learned patience elsewhere. The apartment breathed again. Sophie slept without clutching the door handle in her dreams. Yet safety had a cost too. It demanded vigilance. Anna kept routines simple, trusted sparingly, and carried the memory of the note beneath the door like a scar that reminded her what survival required. Marco's disappearance had thinned the danger, not erased it. That truth lived in her bones. They met rarely, always by chance, always briefly. A cafe at the edge of the city, a park where trees hid faces. They spoke of ordinary things with extraordinary care. Each word weighed for what it might invite. The distance between them was not cold. It was deliberate, an agreement neither had asked for but both understood. When Sophie was mentioned, Marco listened as if the sound of her name was enough. He never asked to see her. He never crossed that line. Restraint, he had learned, was the last form of power he could wield without harm. The city tested him anyway. An old ally appeared one night with an offer framed as concern, stability, protection, a return to relevance. All Marco had to do was step back into the structure he had built. He listened, thanked the man, and declined. The refusal rippled outward. Whispers grew louder. Weakness was a language the city spoke fluently. Marco knew what would come next. It came as an accident. A warehouse fire sparked by negligence, or so the report claimed. No one was hurt. But the message was unmistakable. You can leave, but you cannot escape the shadow of what you were. Marco watched the flames from a distance, hands steady, heart unmoved. He did not respond. He let the silence answer for him. Anna sensed the shift before she heard about the fire. Fear had taught her to read changes in the air. She found Marco the next day, not at the cafe, but standing near the river, coat collar turned up, eyes on the water. They're pushing you, she said, not a question. Yes, he replied. Because of us. Because I walked away. Marco said, You're only the excuse. She absorbed that quietly, anger threading through concern. You don't get to carry this alone. I do, he said gently. That's the point. Anna studied him, seeing the man beneath the legend more clearly than ever. He had not become harmless. He had become deliberate. What happens when they decide silence isn't enough, she asked. Marco's jaw tightened. Then I pay the last price. The words frightened her because they were spoken without drama. She reached for his hand and stopped herself halfway, the old instinct to protect warring with the newer understanding of boundaries. Love, she realized, did not always move toward. Sometimes it stood still and refused to pull another person into its gravity. That night, the city struck closer, a confrontation in an alley that ended quickly, efficiently, without witnesses. Marco walked away uninjured but shaken. The restraint he'd chosen had limits the city intended to test. He understood then that erasure was incomplete. To truly disappear, he would have to sever the last threads binding his name to consequence. He went to Anna once more, not for permission, but for truth. If I leave, he said, not for weeks, but for goodwill, that be enough. Anna closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the question. Sophie slept in the next room, breath even, innocence intact. For us, she said finally. Yes. And for you, Marco asked. She opened her eyes. I don't know, she admitted. But I know staying costs more. They stood in the doorway, the space between them charged with everything they had not allowed themselves to claim. Marco nodded once, decision settling like a final stone. Then this is goodbye, he said, voice steady. Anna surprised herself by stepping forward, resting her forehead against his chest for a single heartbeat. No promises, no future shaped by fantasy, just acknowledgement. Thank you, she whispered. Marco left before dawn. The city woke to rumors that meant nothing without his name to anchor them. Days passed, then weeks. The aftershocks softened. Life resumed its quiet insistence. Sophie drew fireworks again, this time with a sun rising behind them. Anna watched and let herself believe the danger had finally receded. Far from the city, Marco learned the contours of a life without shadows chasing him. It was smaller, quieter, honest in ways power had never been. He carried the cost of his choice like a wound that ached only when he remembered what he had protected by walking away. Some sacrifices announced themselves with blood and spectacle. Others happened in silence, unseen by the world they saved. Marco Duca's was the latter. And as the city forgot his name, the price he paid continued to accrue slow, steady, and irreversible. The city did not announce its final move. It never did. It waited, patient as hunger, until everyone believed the danger had passed. Anna almost believed it. The nights had grown quieter. Sophie slept without waking from dreams she couldn't explain. The streets outside their building returned to the ordinary rhythm of footsteps and distant sirens. Life, careful and fragile, began to resemble peace. That was when the past resurfaced. The letter arrived without a stamp, slipped beneath the door sometime between afternoon and dusk. Anna noticed it immediately, her pulse spiking before she even bent to pick it up. The paper was thick, expensive, the message brief and precise. One loose end remains. No signature, no threat, just certainty. Anna closed the door with shaking hands, every instinct screaming the same truth: Marco had been wrong. Walking away had thinned the danger, but it had not erased it. She did not panic. Panic was a luxury she had abandoned long ago. Instead, she packed a small bag and sat beside Sophie, brushing her hair, memorizing the warmth of her child's presence. Sophie sensed the shift, eyes searching her mother's face. "Is it happening again?" she asked softly. Anna swallowed. "It might," she admitted. But we're not alone." Marco felt it too, miles away, a pressure in his chest that pulled him from sleep. Some instincts never faded. By the time the call reached him, an old contact, a debt unpaid, he was already moving. The city had decided to collect what it believed he still owed. He understood then that his disappearance had only delayed the reckoning. There was one final shadow he would have to face, and it would not stop at him. He returned without ceremony, slipping back into the city like a ghost reclaiming its shape. The meeting was arranged quickly, efficiently, an abandoned structure by the river, chosen for its isolation. Marco arrived alone, unarmed, a calculated insult to those who expected fear. The men waiting for him mistook restraint for surrender. "You left too much behind," one of them said, voice echoing in the empty space. "And you took something that wasn't yours." Marco didn't argue. "I took responsibility," he replied. "That's all." They laughed, confident in numbers, in the certainty of endings they controlled. Marco watched them carefully, measuring distance, intent, the slight tremor of anticipation that preceded mistakes. Violence erupted not with chaos, but with inevitability. It was quick, brutal. Marco fought with the precision of a man who had long ago accepted the cost of survival. But numbers were numbers, and restraint had limits. A blade found him, shallow but deliberate, marking him with pain he refused to acknowledge. When it ended, Marco remained standing, breath controlled, blood darkening his sleeve. The others did not. He staggered once, steadied himself, and left before reinforcements could arrive. This was not victory. It was closure. Anna was already moving. She had called the one number she had sworn never to use again. When Marco answered, his voice strained but alive, relief flooded her with dangerous intensity. "Where are you?" she asked. "Not somewhere you should come," he replied. "I'm already on my way," Anna said, resolve cutting through fear. She left Sophie with a trusted neighbor, whispering reassurances she prayed would hold. The city blurred past as she drove, heart pounding, every memory of Marco's choices rising to the surface. She understood now what he had been preparing for all along. She found him near the river, sitting against a concrete barrier, the city lights reflecting off dark water. Blood stained his coat. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "I know," Anna replied, kneeling beside him. "But neither should you." She pressed her scarf against his wound, hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Marco watched her, something unguarded breaking through his composure. "I tried to finish this without touching your world," he said. "You did," Anna replied. You just forgot that I chose it too. Sirens sounded in the distance, growing louder. Marco closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion finally claiming its due. This was the last of it. He murmured, "After tonight, there's nothing left to chase." Anna held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Then, don't disappear again," she said. "Not like that." He met her gaze, vulnerability bare at last. "If I stay," he said, "it won't be as the man I was. That's the only way I'd let you." Anna answered. They left before authorities arrived, slipping back into anonymity together. Marco received treatment quietly, refusing attention that would resurrect a name he had buried. Anna sat beside him through the night, listening to his breathing, feeling the steady presence she had once believed too dangerous to want. By morning, the city woke to rumors of an ending it could not quite define. The final shadow had passed. What remained was fragile, uncertain, and real. Anna watched the light filter through the window, hope threading carefully through fear. This was not the end, but it was the last night ruled by darkness. Morning arrived without sirens. That alone felt like a miracle. Pale sunlight slipped through the thin curtains and rested on the quiet room, touching the edges of a life that had learned to brace for impact. Marco woke slowly, pain registering as a distant ache rather than a threat. The wound had been cleaned and bandaged in the early hours, tended with a care that felt unfamiliar after years of urgency and blood. He turned his head and found Anna asleep in the chair beside the bed, her posture folded around vigilance even in rest. For a moment, he simply watched her breathe. Peace, he realized, was not the absence of danger. It was the presence of someone who stayed. He shifted carefully. The movement woke her. Anna's eyes opened at once, alert, searching his face. When she saw him awake, something loosened in her expression, relief softening the lines she rarely allowed to show. "You're still here," she said quietly. "So are you," Marco replied. They didn't reach for each other, not yet. The space between them felt earned, delicate, and neither wanted to break it with haste. Outside, the city continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened, buses groaning awake, footsteps layering over one another. Inside, the silence held. Sophie arrived before noon, bursting through the door with the restrained excitement of a child who had been told to be careful. She stopped short when she saw Marco propped against pillows, then crossed the room and climbed onto the edge of the bed as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You look different," she observed, serious as always. Marco smiled. "I feel different." She considered this, then nodded as if it explained everything. "Mama said the bad part is over," Sophie said. Marco looked at Anna. She met his gaze, steady and honest. "The worst of it," she said. "The rest is living." That afternoon, they left the room together. No one followed. No one watched. Marco's name had lost its pull. It no longer bent the air around it. He moved carefully, feeling the city as a place rather than a possession. Anna noticed the way his steps slowed when Sophie lagged behind, the way he waited without impatience. She had once believed love had to arrive loudly to be real. Now she understood that sometimes it arrived as quiet attention. They did not return to the old apartment. They didn't return to the penthouse either. Instead, they found a place that felt like a compromise made honestly a small house on a street where neighbors nodded but did not stare, where evenings smelled like cooking rather than rain on concrete. Marco did not argue when Anna insisted on choosing it together. He did not insist on paying for everything. He learned the language of shared decisions, of patience, of days measured not by control, but by care. Time passed in ordinary increments. Marco took work that asked for his skills without demanding his soul. He built things that stayed built. He cooked poorly at first and then better. Anna returned to her routines without the edge of fear sharpening every step. She laughed more easily. She slept through the night. Sophie drew constantly, covering the refrigerator with suns and tables and 3 figures holding hands. Marco never asked to be in the pictures. Sophie always included him anyway. There were difficult days, nights when the past crept close, whispering of shortcuts and old reflexes. Marco learned to speak those fears aloud, to name them rather than obey them. Anna learned that strength did not require solitude. They argued sometimes about money, about rules, about the way fear could still find its way into their lives. Each argument ended not with distance, but with understanding earned in small, careful steps. Winter returned, softer this time. On New Year's Eve, they went out not to a place of glitter or expectation, but to a diner with a bell on the door and steam on the windows. The booth was narrow. The table wobbled slightly. Marco adjusted it with a folded napkin, smiling at the familiarity of the gesture. Anna watched him, warmth blooming where caution once lived. They ordered simply. Sophie insisted on fries. When they arrived, Marco pushed the basket toward the center of the table without thinking. Anna caught the movement and met his eyes. They shared a smile that carried memory without pain. As the countdown began on a small television above the counter, Sophie took both their hands. Marco felt the weight of them real, grounding. When midnight arrived, the diner filled with soft celebration. No fireworks this time, just laughter and clinking cups. Marco did not wish for power or certainty. He wished only that this ordinary miracle would continue. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle and unhurried. They lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth. Anna looked at Marco, seeing not the man he had been, but the man who had chosen to remain. "We made it," she said. He nodded. "We did. Later." In a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee in winter, Marco stood at the window while Anna tucked Sophie into bed. He watched the streetlights glow and felt the absence of fear like a blessing. When Anna joined him, he took her hand, no hesitation left between them. Once, he had ruled a city. Now, he belonged to a table that held the light.